let's discuss this piece, because while this summit that was conducted in December in Washington, D.C., which was hosted by the U.S. Department of State and Secretary of State Tony Blinken, with his counterparts from mineral-rich countries like Zambia and the Democratic Republic of Congo. They sent their foreign ministers. It didn't get much coverage in U.S. media, although it was covered in Africa. It certainly didn't get much critical coverage. But as you point out, this summit promised more exploitation for Africa and record profits for U.S. mining firms. And at the same time, the rhetoric you heard from the stage was, this partnership will provide value and advance progress. So what happened here, and what was wrong with this summit?
Yeah, well, I mean, let's first point out that it wasn't just mining that was talked about. It really was, I mentioned the piece that was conducted, Davos, World Economic Forum style. We had, the heads of state in Africa and foreign ministers in Africa sitting directly next to, heads of Microsoft and mining companies and telecom companies. And the companies would say, we need, this regulation, the safety regulation, these taxes or whatever we need to make investment more inviting for us in your African country. And they had something that was called, as you pointed out, the deal room, which sounds like it's from a comedy sketch.
Right.
Yeah. It literally says deal room on the podium. And, they announced these deals, whether it was with a telecom giant to close the digital divide, which we've covered before, is really just a way to get, Africans connected to the internet so we can exploit them and collect their data. But it was a lot about mining, and mining kind of went hand in hand.
Here's some footage from the deal room, by the way.
It's beautiful. Climate change at the summit kind of went hand in hand with mining, which is, an interesting combination. But They said, we need to ramp up mining. You guys need to cut these regulations and less safety, environmental regulations for mining so we can save the climate. And that was really what this deal room was about. And at the deal room, you had Cobalt, which was launched by Bill Gates's breakthrough energy venture capital firm and backed by Bezos and Richard Branson. And right on their site, it says, we aim to collect all of the nickel, all of the lithium, all of the cobalt, all of the copper, all of it in the world.
Right.
So we can stop climate change. And so that was they made a deal with Zambia to open up a giant copper mine in Zambia. And that was one of the many deals that happened at this summit.
Right. So that is chilling language. And let's actually show everyone this is from the Cobalt website. And they're promising to discover 12 trillion in new electric vehicle battery mineral deposits. And you can see here, we'll need all of the world's reserves of these metals, plus another 12 trillion of new sources in order to power the electric vehicle revolution. And on the right, you can see this chart. And you pointed out, Jeremy, based on a Sussex University study, that the demand for these minerals will increase by something like 87,000% by the year 2060. So what does this mean for the African continent and specifically for the African labor market?
Of course. Well, I think we pointed out in the piece, it was the New York Times that said, the past energy, industrial revolution and, the Western consumers needed, fossil fuels and fuel. And that was all found in the Middle East. And we know how that ended and how that turned out. And now the Middle East doesn't have any of these minerals, at least not a lot of them. It's all found in Africa. So we need to move our, corporations and, the militarization is kind of, it's aimed now towards Africa because the energy we need is no longer in the Middle East. And so, we need more lithium, more copper, more nickel, all these things. And as the website points out itself, and as researchers point out, in terms of the mines that are open right now, there's literally not enough lithium and nickel and copper to electrify our economy. So we need to find it everywhere we can, everywhere in Africa. So we're going to be opening more mines, and more mines. As we talked to Siddharth Kara, a journalist and researcher, this just means more mines, just means more child labor, more exploitation, more children mining for things and getting their hands all cut up, and no PPE, no shoes, no gloves, no helmets, no masks, no anything. And it's just exponentially more people like this that we need in order to electrify the West's economy.
And to essentially save the world from climate change. Yeah. This is what parts of Africa will look like. I mean, this is a shocking video. I guess it was filmed by Siddharth Kara, who is at the Harvard Carr Center on Human Rights and has written 4 books on human trafficking and spent years in, I guess it was Congo. Yeah. Recording footage like this. This is, it looks like footage from a Cecil B. DeMille film of, you know, Egyptian slavery.
No, it's a lot. And if you listen to Siddharth, his other interviews, and when I spoke to him, this is a crazy video, but there are hundreds of these mines in one country, in the Congo. There are hundreds. Yeah. And the reason that these mines are, you know, our tech giants aren't held accountable for these mines is because they're mining cobalt there.
Right.
The cobalt changes hands dozens of times. It goes from that mine to, you know, unofficial cobalt company, to another unofficial cobalt company, to an official cobalt company, back to unofficial companies. You know, it's a black market, and it ends up at Apple. It ends up at Microsoft. And so we can't hold these tech giants, these Western giants accountable, because we can't actually prove that their cobalt comes from these places, even though, you know, it's unspoken fact in these countries that that's what they're powering. They're powering Western tech giants. It just changes hands too many times that they can't hold them accountable. And these corporations don't have to provide any safety to the actual miners, because they're not technically employees or anything like that. They have zero accountability.
We'll talk a little bit more about the supply chains, because there was a lawsuit in 2020 against Apple, Tesla, and other electric battery makers by these Congolese miners who were alleging that their human rights were being violated on a massive scale. And essentially the defense wriggled out of the lawsuit because of the nature of supply chains.
Yeah, it's the most complicated thing in the industry. It's just that these materials, they fund every single product and every single item that is, you know, digitally, you know, here in the West. The cars, phones, computers, electric things that might be in your kitchen, like a microwave or a stove.
Right.
But the fact that we don't know where they can't actually pinpoint where exactly they come from. So these Congolese miners, they tried to sue these tech giants, and it went to the courts, and the courts were like, listen, the supply chain is so murky. We can't pinpoint where these materials are coming from. So the Congolese miners, you know, they didn't get anything. They just, you know, they go back into the hole. They didn't get anything because Apple says, you know, you guys can't prove where it comes from. And that's pretty much it.
Right. Yeah, I'm looking at this is a lawsuit against 5 major tech companies, and it was dismissed. It was originally filed in December 2019. It was filed against Alphabet, which is Google, Apple, Dell, Microsoft, and Tesla. So basically the big 5. And this would have been a major landmark lawsuit. And it was dismissed because there is not a strong enough causal relationship between the firm's conduct and the miners' industry. So yeah, the firms managed to completely detach themselves from what was happening on the ground because there were so many official and unofficial intermediaries there. So it seems like there is no possibility for legal recourse for any of those people you saw in that shocking footage of that Congolese mine. And that is the way, as you point out, Jeremy Loffredo, that the U.S. and multinational corporations want it. You point to a paper by Deloitte, which is, you know, one of the major kind of beltway bandits here. They get a lot of contracts to do. You know, they get a lot of contracts with the arms industry. They get a lot of contracts with the intelligence, with corporate America. A lot of our public money goes to Deloitte. And it's a strategic partner, as you said, of the World Economic Forum. And they published this 2018 paper called The Future of Mining in Africa. Let's actually, it would actually be interesting to show how that paper is introduced. This is the Future of Mining document, and it begins with a quote by Klaus Schwab. Of the many diverse, and I can't read it in his voice. Can you do a Klaus Schwab?
No, I can't.
Of the many diverse and fascinating challenges we face today, the most intense and important is how to understand and shape the new technology revolution, which entails nothing less than a transformation of humankind. So he's actually kind of talking about transhumanism, or the blending of the biological and digital. But he's concerned that decision makers are too often caught in traditional, linear, and non-disruptive thinking, or too absorbed by immediate concerns to think strategically about the forces of disruption and innovation. And innovation shaping our future. What does Klaus Schwab mean there, and what does this paper by Deloitte about the future of mining in Africa actually argue for?
I think what Klaus is saying is that we're too concerned with, like, you know, there's a moral argument, you know, should we be cutting regulation? Should we be cutting all these things? Should we be protecting these miners right now? If we do that, it might cost us this progressive future that we have our sights on. So, you know, we should sacrifice these, you know, Congolese miners, or, you know, whoever is mining for the things that we need to, you know, successfully find, you know, progress and, you know, evade climate change. So he's saying, you know, let's not worry about these things like workers' rights and, you know, colonialism. We just need to save the planet. We need to save the planet. And there's some things we got to do that. And it's unfortunate.
We have to be disruptors.
We have to be disruptors. And in the paper, I can't remember verbatim, but the paper is more or less saying, you know, we need to stop. We need to create value out of Africans' resources. In the future, we need to worry about value, meaning who defines value? It's going to be the World Economic Forum and the Deloitte and the corporations that are a part of this, you know, initiative to electrify the world economy. And there's some things that we can't have if we want to successfully get to that, which is like, you know, we can't have, you know, pesky regulations and taxes, and we can't have these things if we want to, you know, be progressive, which is, you know, a really backwards way of thinking. But that's what the paper is calling for. And, you know, the World Economic Forum is the thought leader of, you know, global capitalism. So that's the paper that I think sets the scene for this US Africa summit, because they said that we need these things, and Deloitte said that we need these things, and they're exactly the same. And it benefits the same corporate giants over and over.
It really is explicit in this paper. The paper laments that the mining sector, quote, continues to experience scrutiny by regulators in Africa, which supposedly creates uncertainty, delayed investment in mining expansion, and stops the development of new mines. And then Deloitte argues that Africa needs to move away from enforcing regulatory compliance for compliance sake and move towards delivering value. So that was a key term you homed in on. And it's so funny when you think about the World Economic Forum's partnership with Deloitte and the fact that it was a sponsor of this paper, and it leads with a quote by Klaus Schwab, because during the pandemic, the World Economic Forum and its partners have focused so much on tracking technology, on tracking everyone, to the point where in Australia, during its lockdowns, Australian citizens had to actually, if they had a positive test, they had to report their location within 15 minutes when they were called by authorities. or people who were called to who had to quarantine if they were just coming in the country had to do so as well. So individuals and citizens were tracked in ways they never were before. But here you have World Economic Forum's partners arguing against tracking the supply chain of these minerals that are needed to supposedly deliver value and fight climate change, because it will harm investors and prevent new mines from being opened up. So corporations are people, but they're people who don't have to be subjected to the same kind of surveillance that regular people like me or you do. And I find that supremely ironic.
That's a great point. During the pandemic, it was, all about, we need to connect everyone. We need to investigate who everyone's seeing and who everyone's touching and what organizations have which people in them.
Yep.
And when it comes to the supply chain, they just hands off, no regulation, no tracking. We need the cobalt to end up in the West one way or another. We don't want to know where it comes from because that's going to harm investors. That is a funny dichotomy there.
Yeah. So let's talk more about the impact on the global South of this industry. I want to show another video by Siddhartha Kar that you flagged. And by the way, Siddhartha Kar has a long interview on Joe Rogan. It's like 3 hours long. If anyone's interested more in his work without actually having to read it. So yeah, these are trucks lined up. Siddhartha, these are trucks lined up in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Are these
loaded with cobalt, copper, nickel, lithium, tin, manganese, and other EV battery materials, 20 miles long, waiting to cross the border. They take a week to cross and they idle. And well, we know what trucks do. Let's watch it again. Just to see that this is far from a clean.
Yeah, these aren't Teslas.
These aren't Teslas, right?
Yeah, these are hundreds of diesel trucks, and that's just another example of how we're exporting the environmental and health hazards of this supposedly green energy revolution. Maybe our neighbors in here in New York or in DC will have less gas pollution from cars, and that's nice. But we're simply exporting it. Now the toxic pollutants are just in Africa. They're far away, and 20 miles long. 20 miles long of diesel trucks burning fuel so we can get green energy. It's such a silly way of seeing the quote unquote sustainability. And they have the trucks there, and they have 20 miles long of trucks, and nobody's held accountable for that. Like, they're not buying carbon credits. It's not a
right.
It's really backwards how that works.
Yeah, I actually remember traveling through the tropical region of Bolivia, which is become a major mining center because it has massive lithium and copper deposits. I was actually going through there with some activists of the MAS party of Evo Morales, who are advisors to some of the indigenous leadership in the country's interior. And we were talking about how the only way they can actually have an economic future that's sovereign and independent from neocolonial forces is to get control over their own lithium. And as we were driving through there, I saw the same thing that Siddhartha Kar showed there, just trucks and trucks, diesel trucks, excavators, every kind of construction truck. And I had to cover my face for miles because the amount of dust that was being kicked up everywhere in this region, which was previously pristine, was massive. And it's just the air was unbreathable at certain points. And then we would wind up in these long lines of cars behind diesel trucks. And then, you just get the diesel fumes. But this is not an urban area. It's just where the minerals are. And we remember the famous tweet by Elon Musk, "We'll coup whoever we want," when he was challenged over the lithium coup in Bolivia, which Evo Morales called it, that Evo Morales believed he was removed from power in 2019 as part of a larger plan to get more multinational control over the minerals, which he was seeking to nationalize.